Hi, I'm Jeremy Crosby.
And I'm Nick Boucher. We're the hosts for the program that's all about your city, Talking Fitchburg.
Every day, we pull together the news, events, and information you need to stay on top of what's happening in the city of Fitchburg.
Find Talking Fitchburg on cable TV, Roku, Amazon Fire, Apple TV, and our live stream on the web. Plus, you can view all our headlines and stories on Facebook, YouTube, and our video on demand service. This is your city.
Keep up with Talking Fitchburg and the issues that affect you and your neighbors.
Want to know what's happening in your city? Get Notify Me messages from the City of Fitchburg. Visit fitchburgwi.gov on your computer or mobile device and select the big Notify Me button on the left. Enter your email and/or phone number, whichever is best for you to get notifications. Scroll down the list and select all the topics you're interested in to receive email or text messages about. You'll be notified every time one of your topics is updated. Sign up for Notify Me, one more way to keep up with your Fitchburg government.
Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Chad Brecklin. Welcome to our public information session on the operating referendum that has been placed on the November 5th ballot here in the City of Fitchburg. Thank you so much for being here to discuss an important topic for our community. That specifically is a referendum I mentioned in the welcome. Again, my name is Chad Brecklin, and I'm the City Administrator here for the City of Fitchburg. In my role as City Administrator, I'm responsible for the day-to-day operations of the city and for implementing the policy directions of the Mayor and Common Council. During our time today, we'll plan to walk through some slides that provide an overview of the city's challenges, the referendum itself, and the impacts of a vote for or against. Following the presentation, we'll have a time for questions and answers, and it is my hope that you walk away from today's discussion with answers to any questions you may have and that you feel informed heading into the ballot box this fall, or ballot booth. Prior to beginning the presentation, I also wanted to acknowledge anybody that was joining us today, and it does not appear that we have anybody to acknowledge. Excellent. I will go ahead and begin the presentation. So what's this all about? The City of Fitchburg has identified a need for additional funding to increase staffing and invest in services to meet the increasing needs of our growing community. This is a topic that we've been exploring as a community for many months. In particular, we've been looking at this as a potential option to address our needs here in the City of Fitchburg since June of last year. The Common Council and staff have been identifying ways in which revenues could be adjusted that would meet the needs and or through other potential efficiencies and cuts. And ultimately, an options assessment was completed this spring, which identifies the needs of the city and why we are here today. And there was also a survey sent to all of our residential addresses earlier this year as well, seeking input from our residents. As we have shared throughout the journey to where we are today, with the City of Fitchburg community growing, the demand for city services, including our public safety and other core municipal services like infrastructure development and maintenance, has also increased. In the chart that you see on your screen, we can see one measure of the growth. Between 2013 and 2023, Fitchburg's population increased by nearly 34%. For context, our growth significantly outpaces population growth in the state of Wisconsin. That population growth during the same time period was about 3%. One of the other things you'll notice on the graph in front of you is a blue line that represents city staffing over that same time period. While the city's population increased 34%, city staffing increased just under 19%. Let's take a look at our public safety services. Between 2013 and 2022, calls for the Fitchburg Fire Department increased by nearly 40%. As the number of calls increased and our part-time paid on-premise staffing declined, the average response time has increased. Longer response times can be attributed in part to an increased reliance on mutual aid. When mutual aid is required, departments in neighboring communities are asked to provide assistance and a response until our fire personnel, in this case, can arrive on scene. Increasing the amount of time between a call is placed and when help arrives is often a resulting outcome of when mutual aid is needed. Additionally, this referendum looks to increase our paid on-call or part-time firefighter minimum hourly rate to at least $15 per hour. As mentioned in an earlier slide, the amount of paid on-call part-time firefighting staff has declined in recent years. That is a national trend in the fire services and is not necessarily isolated to the city of Fitchburg. This base rate of $15 an hour, again, would be a base rate, and our paid on-call part-time firefighting staff would be eligible for hourly rate increases based upon the number of training and other certifications as well as experience that they have with the city. Along the same lines, we've seen an increase in demand for public safety services provided by our police department. As you can see on the slide, between 2013 and 2022, the police department experienced a nearly 23% increase in calls for police services. As you can imagine, it is becoming increasingly challenging to meet the growing public safety demands with the limited staff that are currently available. With the funding challenges in mind, as well as the staffing capacity issues experienced in our police department, they have applied for a grant that would allow them to add 3 police officers. This grant is offered by the United States Department of Justice under their COPS hiring program. Our police department has been selected for a grant award that would temporarily fund 3 police officers for a 3-year period. The grant does require a match, and the city would have to provide 2/3 of the funding for these police officers, and the grant would cover 1/3 of that funding. And the city would be expected to keep those 3 additional police officers for at least 1 year after those grant funds expire. Without the additional funding that this referendum would provide, the Fitchburg Police Department would likely need to turn down the grant and would not be able to hire the 3 additional police officers that could be partially funded with the federal COPS grant dollars. Additionally, a need for the city results from its growing space needs issues. The city has planned for the construction of a new police services building that will address space needs not only within our police department, but also within our city hall. The planning for these space needs issues began back in 2015, and as the city has grown, staff has also increased since the city hall building, which houses not only city hall staff, but also police department staff, has been experiencing space needs for nearly 10 years now. And as mentioned earlier, this project with the new police services building will allow the police department to move into a new and larger space to meet their needs and allow city hall staff to expand into the vacated space within the current police department. It is anticipated that construction on the new police services building will begin late next year and will be completed in early 2027. The funding in this referendum will enable the city to operate the police services building. Those operating expenses that would be covered through this referendum include the hiring of a building maintenance custodian, a full-time building maintenance custodian, covering operating expenses such as utilities, and it would also allow the city to set aside and build a modest reserve that would allow it to prepare for regular building systems replacements and repairs that we all know will be necessary in the future. This referendum also seeks to address the increasing need for transit services in our community. As you can imagine, the growth has increased pressure on traffic and, as mentioned, increased the need for additional transit services. The increased funding to the transit system would allow the city to invest in enhanced transit and paratransit service, which we currently do not have. Paratransit service would be offered within 1/2 mile of an established route if the city were to be able to invest additional dollars in its transit services. Specifically, we would also improve access between residential areas in the city with job centers and city facilities such as the City Hall, the Senior Center, and the library. It is anticipated that the Common Council will invest these additional transit dollars to improve the service on routes 65 and 75. Currently, those routes have peak-only service during morning and afternoons on the weekdays, and the enhancements that could be covered under this referendum would allow these routes to expand to varying levels of all-day service on weekends and weekdays and weekends. The City of Fitchburg has been a careful steward of our budget and the resources that are provided by our taxpayers. One way in which we evidence the careful stewardship of the budget is through a recent upgrade in the city's bond rating by our Moody's Investment Services. The city is currently one of 6 municipalities rated by Moody's here in the state of Wisconsin with a AAA bond rating. That is the best bond rating that they provide to municipalities here within the state of Wisconsin. That does allow us to borrow money, for instance, at a lower cost than it would be if our bond rating was lower. Some things that have been done in order to help achieve this high bond rating is ensuring that the city is following the financial policies that have been set, ensuring that there are no structural deficits, that there is an operating reserve in the case of emergencies, and many other things. Unfortunately, much like everyone, the city is experiencing higher need and higher costs to address those needs. And unfortunately, the funding and the needs are not synced with one another. The needs outpace our current funding capacity, and additional dollars are needed to hire public safety and administrative personnel, address growing operating costs, and invest in our transit system. Costs have increased due to factors including the increasing cost to recruit and retain our professional, service-oriented staff, inflationary pressures on equipment, the cost of supplies, materials, and other services, as well as other operating expenses associated with maintaining the high level of services our community appreciates. So what's the ask? To address the challenges, the City of Fitchburg has placed a referendum on the ballot for November 5th. The referendum will ask Fitchburg voters whether or not they support a $3,593,000 increase in the property tax levy going forward to fund 5 sworn police positions, 6 firefighters, 3 additional city staff positions, the police services building operating costs, improvements to public transit, and other city operating costs. You may be asking, why go to a referendum to fund these solutions? Well, the city's ability to respond to changes in the demand for services is restricted by state legislation. State legislation specifically limits property tax levy increases primarily to the percent increase in equalized value from net new construction. This allowable increase This allowable increase is based on net new construction alone are insufficient to meet the growing needs of the Fitchburg community. And in order to exceed the state-imposed levy limits, the city must ask voters for approval via referendum. Why now? Well, like many other Wisconsin communities and school districts, growing needs and expenses have outpaced the city's ability to hire staff and make investments to fund solutions. In order to invest in staffing and fund growing operating costs necessary to maintain and improve existing services, additional funding is now required. So here's the referendum question that you'll see on the November ballot. I won't read this to you. I'll allow those who are watching to read this question, but I do want to indicate or state that the Department of Revenue requires this to be the question language. The city does not have any flexibility or latitude to write the question in any other fashion. So take a moment and please read the question, and we'll talk about what this question means over the next few slides. Hopefully you had an opportunity to work your way through that question. We do also want to demonstrate where you'll be able to locate that question on the ballot that you'll receive when you hit the voting booth on November 5th, or before if you elect to choose to vote via in-person, absentee, or absentee by mail. There are two ballot styles that you'll see within the City of Fitchburg with referendum questions on them. The first ballot on the left is for those Fitchburg residents who do not live within the Madison Metropolitan School District. You'll see that the question that's posed via the City of Fitchburg referendum is on the back of the ballot in the upper left-hand corner. The ballot on the right is the ballot style that those who reside in the Madison Metropolitan School District will see. They will see a total of 3 referendum questions on their ballot, with the City of Fitchburg referendum question again in the upper left-hand corner of the back of that ballot. If Fitchburg voters approve the referendum, the city would be able to institute a one-time permanent $3,593,000 increase to the property tax levy, beginning with property tax bills issued in December of 2024. I want to reiterate, this is a one-time increase of just under $3.6 million. It is not a $3.6 million increase next year, and every year an additional $3.6 million being added every year thereafter. It is one $3.6 million increase that is permanent. It remains in effect. Again, if this referendum is approved, it would translate to a property tax impact of approximately $65.20 per $100,000 in assessed property value. The impact to a median Fitchburg home valued at $457,800 is estimated to be $298.49 annually, or $24.87 per month. The city has added a tax calculator to its website under the referendum section. That would allow anyone who's interested to learn what their increased property tax estimate will be if the referendum is approved. Again, you can locate this referendum tax calculator tool on the city's website, and here's what it looks like in the slide you're seeing now. So you would simply type your assessed property value, and your property tax increase estimation will appear in the blue box to the right. It calculates both annual and monthly tax impact. People provide services, and the city's ability to address community priorities has been limited by our staffing capacities. The city turned to Baker Tilly to perform an operational and organizational review of the City of Fitchburg and required department heads to review current and projected future workloads as part of this process. These efforts uncovered a need for more than 50 additional city staff members in the coming years. Clearly, we know it's not feasible to add these 50 positions all at one time, and it's probably not feasible to even add these 50 positions in the next 3 to 5 years. Therefore, the city has prioritized its highest needed positions based upon the organizational study that was completed by Baker Tilly, as well as the feedback that was provided by our department heads. If approved, the city will have the funding needed to address increasing demand for public safety services, which would allow the city to hire 5 sworn positions in the police department. Those positions would specifically be 3 police officers, of which they would be partially grant funded, 1 lieutenant, 1 sergeant, and 6 firefighters. The additional staffing in the police department will allow them to assign a full array of officers and supervisory and command staff to the 3rd shift and fully cover their peak service hours. It will also ensure the city's ability to accept that federal grant funding. The hiring of 6 additional full-time firefighters will help maintain and improve the Fitchburg Fire Department's ability to respond to emergencies in a timely manner, address staffing vacancies caused by decreasing volunteer availability, and assist in reducing overtime and existing over-reliance on our current full-time staff, thereby improving the reliability of staffing levels. This would also allow the city and its fire department to staff approximately 75% of the annual shift hours needed to cover 2 engines with full-time firefighters. Currently, the city is utilizing full-time firefighters in less than 50% of these annual hours. The referendum funding will also allow the city to pay its part-time volunteer on-call firefighters a minimum hourly wage of approximately $15 per hour, again helping to retain the existing staff and ideally attracting new staff as well. The city would also be able to hire a communications director, a human resources generalist, and a finance manager, which would allow the city to improve its communication and transparency with the community, improve its recruitment and retention efforts, which obviously impact the quality and availability of services you as a resident, visitor, or otherwise person visiting the city of Fitchburg, from things like snow removal to parks maintenance, street maintenance, and public safety. It will also allow for the management of the financial operations of the city, which would include supporting the finance director and the public works department. Currently, we have a number of our engineering staff who are tasked with financial related responsibilities that could be shifted to a new position and would allow those in our public works department to focus on public works and engineering related tasks more exclusively. The city would also be able to fund, through this referendum, the operating costs associated with the new police services building, which would include the hiring of a full-time building maintenance custodian, and as well as funding transit and paratransit system improvements, and also provide a small reserve available for ongoing city expenses largely related to existing personnel costs. If the referendum were to be rejected by a majority of voters on November 5th, the City of Fitchburg and its Common Council will have to make difficult decisions on how to address the growing need for public safety, parks and other maintenance-related tasks, communication services, and growing challenges related to recruiting and retaining staff. This would result in maintaining at this point in time, current funding for the existing services and staffing that the city provides. It may begin to limit the city's ability to employ and retain quality staff, and it is quite likely that future reductions in service and staffing levels will be necessary as costs continue to increase and funding does not increase commensurately. There are additional public information sessions that are coming up in the event you would like to attend another one. There are 2 upcoming in-person information sessions. The next in-person session will be October 17th at 6 p.m., and that'll be hosted at Fitchburg Fire Station number 3 at 2950 South Scion Road. The final in-person information session will be October 21st at 6 p.m., and that'll be hosted at Four Winds Farm at 5735 Adams Road. And then there will be one more virtual session, and that'll be October 28th at 6 p.m. So in summary, this referendum will ask voters whether or not they support a $3,593,000 increase in the property tax levy going forward to fund 5 police positions, which includes 3 police officers, 1 lieutenant, and 1 sergeant. That funding for the police department would allow the city to accept $375,000 in grant funding that will partially offset the cost of the 3 police officers. It will allow the department to increase its community-oriented policing efforts through additional neighborhood-based police officers, and it will enhance supervisory coverage during peak times. The city is also looking to hire 6 additional firefighters through this referendum. The referendum would allow the firefighters to be added that would reduce dependency on part-time volunteer employees and overtime to staff its engines, and as mentioned earlier, would allow approximately 75% of the annual coverage hours necessary to staff those 2 engines 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, to be filled by full-time staff, whereas today less than 50% of those shifts are currently covered by full-time staff. And also this referendum would allow the city to pay its part-time firefighters at least $15 an hour. In addition, there are 3 non-public safety positions, 1 communications director, 1 human resources generalist, and 1 finance manager. Again, as talked about earlier, this will allow the city to improve its communications and outreach with residents, help recruit, retain, and provide capacity for day-to-day human resources functions, and would allow engineers to spend more time on infrastructure projects versus finance-related functions. The referendum also seeks funding for the ongoing operating costs associated with the new police department building. Again, that funding would allow us to hire a full-time building maintenance custodian, would fund the operational costs such as utilities and and standard maintenance that occurs over the course of the year, and would allow the city to build a modest reserve for future building and mechanical systems replacement. The referendum seeks funding to improve our transit and add paratransit service. Those improvements are likely to occur on routes 65 and 75 and allow those routes to change from peak service hours only on weekdays to day and evening service on weekdays and weekends. And then finally, other sitting operating costs are likely to be reserved for future personnel cost increases related to the staff that the city already has. You can see in the chart to the right that this total funding is spent on approximately 66% public safety, 13% on other operating costs. Again, those are likely to be future personnel cost increase. And Non-public safety personnel is approximately 11%, and transit improvements is approximately 10%. This translates to a property tax impact, again, of $65.20 per 100,000 in assessed property value, and the impact to a median Fitchburg single-family home valued at $457,800 is estimated to be $298.49 annually, or $24.87 per month. Make sure to head to the polls on Tuesday, November 5th to vote on this referendum question. The city's polling locations will be open at 7 a.m. and will close at 8 p.m. Wisconsin voters are required to show an acceptable photo ID in order to vote, and additional voting information, including hours for in-person absentee voting and information on how to request an absentee ballot, can be found on the city's website or myvote.wi.gov. This completes my presentation. I'll now open the floor for questions. We do ask that each person ask one question at a time, and we'll rotate through everyone who has a question. And once everyone has had an opportunity to ask a question, we'll circle back to those who may have additional questions. If you are in the virtual meeting here and have that question, please use your raise hand button at the bottom of the screen and you'll be recognized to speak. Your video will remain off and you will be unmuted when it is your turn to speak and you are recognized. And then if you have additional questions following the meeting, I'll have a slide that comes up that will show you where to find additional information. I will also point out right now on the slide that you're seeing in front of you, there is a website that is on the city's page, fitchburgwi.gov/referendum. So with that in mind, we'll transition to the question section. Charlene, you have a question? I'm sorry, Charlie, do you have a question?
Yeah, thank you very much. Really appreciate the presentation today and the opportunity just to learn more about how the city is thinking about this referendum. I was wondering if you could tell us a little bit more about net new construction. So at least as I understand it, in kind of a layman's term, the city's property tax levy goes up as new houses are constructed within the city limits. And based on the population growth chart that you showed us, it looks like Fitchburg is benefiting from net new construction more than most communities in the state. And so I wonder if you could give us a little more detail about what kind of financial benefits the city has seen from net new construction, and maybe just give us a little bit better context about how the city sees that as insufficient.
Yeah, that's a great question. I appreciate you bringing it up. So you are correct in that the city is growing as evidenced by the slide in population growth, and just simply when you drive around our community you can see a number of projects underway, both multifamily, single family, residential, some commercial projects and those sorts of things. Current state law does allow the city to increase its property tax levy based upon the increase in its net new construction each year. For instance, we can use the 2025 operating budget that we're currently in process of working to adopt through our Common Council this fall. For the 2025 operating budget, the city had a net new construction of just over 2.9%. That is an increase of approximately $750,000 in its levy. And as you can imagine, when you take a look at what the cost to maintain existing services, if that increases 2.9 or 3%, the net new construction levy increase is largely going to be or exclusively going to be utilized to maintain existing services at the levels in which they are currently being provided. It does not necessarily allow for the city to add the additional staffing capacity that may be needed due to the population growth. Generally speaking, as a community grows and adds more people and businesses, there is more demand for city services. And what you are seeing now is that while the city is very fortunate to have net new construction, that in many cases is much better than many communities throughout the state, that net new construction is largely only able to allow us to maintain existing staffing levels and existing services. Does that answer your question?
That does. Thank you. I really appreciate it.
Sure.
Check the document.
Okay, hang on one second. So the next question from Ann says, you mentioned that there were other city staff positions that would ideally be funded. What additional priorities were considered for this referendum? Well, I mentioned in that organizational study and requests from department heads to examine their current and future workloads yielded approximately 50 positions that needed to be funded over time. So we've identified again the highest needed positions through that study, as well as conversation and feedback from department heads. But there are many other departments that have staffing needs. Those specifically are positions within our parks and street maintenance departments, our public works department and engineering, our senior center, additional positions besides the ones identified in the referendum in both our police and fire departments, as well as many other departments in City Hall. I don't believe that there were any departments that indicated that they had no need for additional staffing over the next 5 years or so. So this wasn't an easy decision to reach. Again, nearly all, if not all, departments have identified additional staffing capacity that is needed to continue to meet the increasing needs and expectations of our community. And these were the positions that were identified as highest priority. And that process that was utilized to identify these positions was also including the feedback that was provided in our community survey and through ongoing conversation with our Common Council since June of 2023, which would also indicate the priorities in which the Common Council wanted to fund with the positions. Does that answer the question? Other questions? One's coming in here in the chat. Hang on. The follow-up question is, any priorities other than staffing? Well, the city does have a lot of priorities to fund. When you look at just the ongoing costs associated with maintaining existing services, that is one of the things that the operating reserve that's included in this referendum would look to cover. That is a priority in order to continue to recruit and retain staff that was covered. And we do know that there are needs within our park system for maintenance staff and or additional funding for operating expenses. There could be additional need in our streets department for roadway funding, although we did deploy a significant amount of ARPA money that was provided to the city for additional road resurfacing and maintenance projects. When you look at the city as a whole, again, the city provides a number of services that many in our community value, and you could make the argument that nearly all of those services have additional costs. And since they have been funded in many cases for quite some time by multiple mayors and common councils, that these are all priorities for our community and are all viable options for additional funding. The next question that comes in from Corey indicates, we noticed our tax assessment value increased by about 30% this year. Should we expect our tax bill to increase at a similar amount, or will that be mitigated by adjusting the mill rate? Just trying to evaluate the existing tax increase before accounting for this additional referendum request. Yes, the city did do a revaluation again in 2024. The last revaluation was done in 2022. So this accounts for 2 years worth of changed values based upon market values for properties within the city of Fitchburg. As many have noticed, property values, when looking at the fair market price for them, have continued to increase over the last couple of years, and that has led to, in many cases, a notable increase in assessed property values. I think the average increase citywide was roughly 18 to 20% during the most recent revaluation process. To answer the question as to whether or not you should expect your tax bill to increase at a similar amount, or will it be mitigated by adjusting the mill rate, the City Common Council will likely adjust the mill rate, which would obviously equate to ultimately taxing at a lower increase than what the assessed value increase would be. For instance, in 2022, when the city last did its revaluation, again, property tax values, assessed values went up again, probably on average about 20%. During that process, the tax mill rate that was approved by the Common Council basically led to a flat level of city levied tax, and therefore the property tax values that were created during the assessment process did not align with the tax increase that was, I believe it was probably about 2 to 3% in an increased value. I don't have that information in front of me, but the short answer and in summary is that generally speaking, in the vast majority of cases, tax bills do not increase at a corresponding rate of assessed values. I will add, as it relates to this question, that one thing that we do want to make sure that, as it relates to this question about evaluating existing tax increases before accounting for the additional referendum request, this referendum request is over and above what any increase would be identified by the approved operating budget that the Common Council will adopt in November. Currently, as it stands, the mayor's proposed budget has an increase of approximately 3.3%. When comparing that to inflation, I think the last 12-month period had an inflationary rate of about 3.2%. So this proposed budget from the mayor is generally aligned with the rate in which the inflationary CPI has been. And the estimated impact on the average single-family home valued at approximately $457,000 is right around $85. Other questions?
Call Charlie again.
Charlie, another question?
Yeah, thank you. One of the other pieces about revenue that we heard a lot about last year was the shared revenue bill at the state legislature, which, as I understand it, brought increasing state aids to municipalities across the state. I think, if I understand it correctly, that was somewhat uneven depending on community size. Can you tell us a little bit about how Fitchburg has or has not benefited from that shared revenue bill?
Yes, thank you for that question. You are correct that the state legislature and governor did add supplemental shared revenue to municipalities last year. That was the first increase in shared revenue, I believe, in over 2 decades. And in Fitchburg's case, it was welcomed. It did allow us to address some existing service and staffing needs. And I can kind of give a summary of how that dollars was deployed here in a minute. And ultimately, though, we knew that that was probably only going to be a one-time infusion of some additional state aid, despite the fact that the state government is sitting on approximately $3 billion in surplus revenue right now. There is a tie to the state sales tax, and our shared revenue could increase based upon the state revenues. What I will say is for our 2024 operating budget, we received about $800,000 in additional shared revenue. And I'll talk again, as I mentioned, about where that money was spent. And I will say that the increase in our shared revenue, supplemental shared revenue payment for the 2025 operating budget was about $25,000 more provided to us. So how did we utilize the approximately $800,000 that was added to the 2024 budget? We used nearly $400,000 of that increase for maintaining existing police department services, specifically staffing, cost of living adjustments, and other costs associated with personnel in the police department. We used approximately $150,000 to maintain existing staffing levels within our fire department. That would include cost of living adjustments and other costs associated largely in both the case of existing personnel in the police and fire departments, increase for benefit costs. We reclassified 2 police lieutenants to captains. That was approximately $15,000 cost. We reclassified a records specialist position to an executive assistant in the police department at a cost of approximately $17,000. We added an additional career full-time firefighter position in the fire department. That was approximately $115,000. We increased the base hourly rate from $9 to $12 in the fire department for its part-time firefighting staff. That cost approximately $80,000, and the remaining approximately $70,000 went to roadway maintenance or supplies. So hopefully that identifies where that additional shared revenue went. Again, we were grateful to be able to receive that. It was certainly helpful in allowing us to maintain existing staffing in both our police and fire departments, allowed us to make some adjustments to the positions within the police department and add a full-time firefighter in the fire department, as well as increase the minimum pay rate from $9 to $12 an hour for our part-time firefighters, and spend a little bit more on roadway maintenance. All right,
Great.
got another question coming in.
Thanks for all that
here.
detail.
Yeah, you're welcome. Another question here. I understand, this is from Ann, the city is borrowing money to build the police services facility. This will mean that eventually the residents will need to pay down that loan. What is the plan for paying this loan off? Will it involve future referenda to increase the tax levy again? Excellent question. So the city will obviously need to borrow funds for the police services building. Right now, the Common Council has authorized that project to cost up to $40 million, with $35 million associated for the building and up to $5 million for sustainability and energy efficiency improvements. The city has already borrowed for approximately 20% of the cost of that building, and that cost for the borrowing will be included in the 2025 operating budget that has been proposed by the mayor, and that I have already identified what the estimated increase is on the average single-family home. The city will need to pay down that loan. Typically, that's done over a 20-year period. The city will borrow at least a majority of the remaining cost, although it is possible the Common Council may elect to use a combination of a few things to also offset the cost of that facility. They may be able to use some cash on hand that would be able to reduce the overall amount of dollars that are borrowed. And they also may consider implementing a building impact fee that any new development projects would be required to pay a fee that would be utilized to offset the cost, or I'm sorry, to pay down the debt for that facility. We do know that the city's AAA bond rating is likely to reduce its interest costs as it relates to this project. I think our first borrowing, which was this first round of funding, we estimated it was, I think our financial advisors estimated it was 0.3% to 0.5% is what they estimated the rate reduction was based upon the city's bond rating. So the city is certainly, again, looking to be good financial stewards of our taxpayer resources and making strong financial decisions that, again, recognize the impact on its taxpayer. The last question you have is, will it involve future referenda to increase the tax levy again? I do not anticipate that the police services building itself is going to require a future referenda. I will be clear in stating that the current referenda that's proposed by or on the city ballots for November 5th is likely to last the city approximately 3 to 5 years. And the Common Council considered asking for a higher dollar amount that would allow the city to not need to come back to referendum, say within a 3 to 5 year period. However, ultimately the Common Council did not feel that it was appropriate to levy, say, $7 or $8 million and then have that money basically be collected, but perhaps reserved for future uses, and thereby we be taxing our residents and property owners well in advance of that money being utilized to maintain or otherwise enhance city services. So the Common Council ultimately elected to address the most pressing needs through this referendum, which is that just under $3.6 million amount. And we do anticipate, absent changes in the state legislature's funding formula related to shared revenue and or levy limit requirements, that the city will likely have to come back to referendum at some point in the future. So I will move on to one more item here within the presentation. We do have the ability for residents, business owners, visitors to stay informed of city communications. There are a variety of different ways in which the city offers communications and sharing of information, such as information related to recreational programming, road projects, city meetings, those sorts of things. You can simply scan the QR code that you might be seeing on your screen right now, or go to our city website and look for the Notify Me feature as one of the main ways in which you can stay informed. But of course, our website does have a whole host of information, and then we are also on social media, Facebook, X, YouTube, our Fact TV, and those sorts of things. I do want to thank you for your time over your lunch hour. Appreciate you asking questions and learning more about the referendum and the needs of the city. If you have any any further questions that may come up outside of this presentation, please don't hesitate to reach out to me. My phone number is listed here on the slide, as well as my email address. And then again, as a reminder, you can go to the city's website for additional information, fitchburgwi.gov/referendum. Thank you, and have a great day.